Released in 2016, this featured directorial debut from Daniels, starring Paul Dano and Daniel Radcliffe, debuted at Sundance Film Festival, where it won the Daniels the Directing Award Dramatic. While this movie is the epitome of a pull my finger joke and sits at 72% on Rotten Tomatoes, the performances given by Dano and Radcliffe are not to be denied. Today, on You've Never Seen It, we're talking Swiss Army Man. Welcome to You've Never Seen It, an audio podcast where I am on a mission to never hear these four words again. I am your host, Allison Salamone, and joining me today is a writer and an actor whom you may have seen in Bong of the Living Dead, Harvest Lake, The Legend of Wasco, or his most successful commercial series as Bucky the Farmer. He's also a podcaster who co-hosts Ramble On About Movies and Apartment 303, a community-themed podcast. I am joined by the wonderful Dan Nye. Hi, Dan.
Thank you. Well, I'll say it was a glowing intro if I didn't, cobble it together, because it's one of those things that I'm still getting used to saying positive things about myself and accepting positive things about me, which is ironically a very good theme for this movie.
It really is when you think about it. So look, I forced you to do something like that because I want to make sure you get all of your flowers. Also, this is the second time that I can officially say I made it through an entire intro and did not have to stop.
It was, well, and that's the thing. It sounded, I know, and having done podcasts for years myself, it's very conversational, but there's also those sometimes clunky parts where it's like, and it's especially when you're asking someone to say nice things about themselves, and then it's like I'm hearing my words come out of your mouth, and I'm like, make it your own, and you learn a lot about that and how I'm sure the more you go on, the more you get used to it. It's going to be like, oh, I'll change this here, and this will be so. But no, that sounded great. It sounded fantastic. I'm very happy and flattered. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir. My first two episodes, my husband sat down to listen to them, and he was like, "So, just a little bit of critique." He's like, "Nothing bad, but." You don't say your own name until you give away your Twitter handle at the end
That's
of
funny.
the show. And I was like, oh, he's like, you do great intros for everybody else, but you don't say who you are at the top of the show. So I had to go back and add that in for like all my fun front loaded.
That goes along with just kind of getting used to it. Like when we were doing Ramble On About Movies, it took us a long time, and then we wound up giving each other nicknames. And it was I do not have the type of personality or ego to call myself handsome. So Eric for years just called me Handsome Dan, and so now that's what everyone in our shared space calls me. And I'm kind of like, right, I'm gonna roll with it. Like you might as well. Sure, yeah. And so I called him Clever Eric. So that's how we would introduce each other to take a little bit of the awkwardness out of it. So that's what worked for us. So it's more along the lines of just finding what works for you.
Yeah. And this has been super fun getting through all of this and getting to watch these movies that I have wanted to see, never sat down to really kind of watch. And the one that we're talking about today was actually not even on my list. It was suggested by you, and it's Swiss Army Man, directed by Daniels. It was the first directorial debut and written by them. You get Paul Dano, and you get Paul Dano and Daniel Radcliffe, and then some Mary Elizabeth Winstead at the end.
Like a peppering, a little sprinkling.
But this is probably...
What are your initial thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so initial
curious.
thoughts is, first off, as soon as A24 popped up, I went, okay.
Tempered expectations.
I know what I know what ride I'm coming in for with this, because you got A24 is also obviously Everything Everywhere All at Once, also directed by Daniels, and then you also have like Marcel the Shell, and then you have like The Green Knight and this crazy Scarlett Johansson movie that I saw where she lures men into a house and murders them, and she's like so there's just wide breadth of
they have a wide swath of film, and they're very much
cover everything.
That was one of the reasons too, like, and it's worth noting, like you messaged me a little bit while you were watching it. It's worth noting, like, and I'm sure we'll get into it, like where the state of cinema is now versus then.
Mhm.
Because I was thinking about this after rewatching it because it'd been a little bit of time for me too, and for a long time I was like, this is definitely my favorite film. And then reflecting on it now, I'm like, the new one from Daniels, Everything Everywhere, may overtake it just
Yeah.
because it's like, but even like you kind of have to talk about those two in the same breath because you can see how this is a precursor to that. And there's even a line in one of the songs in Swiss Army Man where they, I think I wrote it down because when I was making a little bit of notes, it was some of the lyrics are literally they say what's happening on the screen,
Yeah.
and the one for that one was where to go. I know I have it down. Everything everywhere matters to everything, and it's
Mhm.
like repeated and sang, and we'll get into that in the themes and motifs later. But this came out in 2016, as you know, before the pandemic, before the world ended, and
Right.
I think it was a much different. This is when we reviewed this for Ramble On. I actually asked my podcast partner, asked Eric. I felt so strongly after I saw this movie. I was like, I went on my own, and I would have a habit where I would go and maybe do a double feature by myself in like a local theater back in Ohio. And I told him, I sent him a message. I'm like, hey, can I record this review on my own? Because we typically waited and we like bulk recorded them and we
Mhm.
dropped them whenever we could. But this one was one of those things where I felt so strongly about it. It was such a unique story that I'm like, I need to talk about this now. And my favorite thing is like when you talk to like obviously we share a lot of mutual friends and a lot of the same headspace, but when you talk about people that are like, oh, Hollywood's so out of ideas and there's no original concepts or anything, and I'm like, this movie's about a farting corpse that slowly comes back to life.
Right.
Like,
It's like it's a zombie movie without being a zombie movie in a way. Like he's not eating his brains, but he's literally
mhm,
learning how to be a human again. I think one of like my favorite lines in this is like as Manny is as Daniel Radcliffe is like coming back and Paul Dano's trying to get him to remember things and they start talking about Jurassic Park and they start like humming the theme music to it and then
mhm.
when he realizes that Daniel Radcliffe just has no idea what Jurassic Park is, he just goes with such like frustration. If you don't know Jurassic Park, then you don't know shit.
You don't know shit. It's so and so many of these things, like, are just great themes. Jurassic Park is, like, a good theme through the movie, not only in, like they do it in shadow puppets at one
Mhm.
point,
Yeah.
um, but I think for me, when we were describing this and when we did our year-end wrap-up of 2016, the way I categorized it in my head that I didn't even think about it until we were talking about it was, to me, this is as close of as we'll ever see to a live action Calvin and Hobbes because it's like you have one character, an imaginary friend, and they kind of go back and forth and they
Yeah.
trade roles, but like that energy is the same. And it's like, it's literally, and with this and with Everything Everywhere, there's an amount of hope and innocence to where it's like, they're just like, well, why can't we ask these questions? And I think even though they broach some like extremely heavy topics and some taboo topics, nothing like that's like gross, but like things you don't always talk about, like why can't you fart in front of people? And it's like a very silly question,
Yeah.
but they're approaching it with such care and such like they're like earnestly asking. And I think that's one of my favorite parts, especially about Daniel Radcliffe, is so good. And I love his career trajectory after Harry Potter. He's like, I've
Right?
made my money, I'm just gonna do a bunch of weird shit.
Well, the only other movie that I've watched Daniel Radcliffe in since Harry Potter prior to this one was
Mm,
is Guns Akimbo.
I
Is
need to watch that. I've
oh my
heard really good
god.
things.
It's so good. It's so good. It is just it is fantastic, Daniel Radcliffe. The shit that happens in that movie, talk about like
Mhm.
mind blowing. Like,
They're like
oh
right before it was gonna be released, like, the director kinda went off the deep end and said some really, like, egregious things that I'm
yeah.
like, "I don't wanna give you my time or attention."
I
Like, I know
know.
I'll get around to it eventually, but it's also one of those things, like, I sometimes with our consumerism, we can only vote with our viewership
Yeah.
or what have you,
Yeah.
so same kinda thing.
But it was that is a wild, just another wild. I
Mhm.
love. I mean, Daniel Radcliffe has that Harry Potter money, so he really is in the position of like, I
Yeah,
don't give a fuck. Like I'm gonna go do what if I want to be on stage naked on a horse in Equus, I'm gonna do it. Like good
yeah.
for you, sir.
No,
Good
he's
for you.
and even, in The Lost City, I don't know if you watched that yet,
I have
but
not yet.
he's the villain and he's, convincing. Like he's this that's not really a stretch of it as opposed to this where he's doing a lot of like subtle acting work. That's much more like a little almost like Bond villain light is a good
Hmm.
way to describe that. And he has one or two scenes where you get a little bit of mania, so it's really fun. But like especially since this movie, since Swiss Army Man is just him and Paul Dano, like if they don't if it doesn't work, if they don't buy into it, this is something that very easily could have went awry very, very
Oh yeah.
quickly.
And
But
not been anywhere near as good as it
mhm,
was without the two of them playing off of each other. And it's so funny because a lot of stuff that I've watched Paul Dano in is I've watched him like in The Batman, in Prisoners. I've seen him in
mhm,
these, weirdo, recluse, serial killer esque kind of roles, which he does really, really well.
yeah,
So, and even though like he's still kind of a weird guy in this role, the it's more it's more heartfelt, it feels like, because here he is like
for sure.
lost and he's stuck and he finds this corpse, and now this corpse is becoming it's coming alive, and it's his friend, and he's teaching him how to just be a person, and
Mhm,
using the world around him, and using his own fears and putting them onto Daniel Radcliffe, whether that be for his entertainment or whether that just be for companionship because he's so alone. He just
mhm,
does so well. Everyone always talks about. I even said to you when you messaged about saying, when I asked if you wanted to be on the show, and you brought up Swiss Army Man, I was like, oh, the Daniel Radcliffe movie. You were like, and Paul Dano. Like, we
yeah,
need to not forget Paul Dano. And it's so easy to forget him because of the Daniel Radcliffe of it all, because
mhm.
this was like his big thing after, really kind of after the Harry Potter stuff. So it's real easy to forget that Paul Dano's in, and Paul Dano really carries this movie so much, because a lot of the stuff that Daniel Radcliffe is doing with his body and with his movements and things like that can't be accomplished without Dano being right there to hold him up, to grab the items, and do kind of all of that physical comedy with him.
Mhm. I also think it was, like, along those lines of the balance they had to do. One of these things that I was really interested in viewing it now in, I can't say post-pandemic, still mid, hopefully later to mid-pandemic, is there's been such a change in a lot of the cultural in our society as well, to actually focusing on people's mental health and
Hmm.
talking about this. And I think because this came out at a time when that wasn't so much of a talking point for really anybody, I think that's why it struck a chord with me so much back then, because it was like in 2016, we're talking 6 years ago at this point, and you're having characters on screen, and within the first so in the first 10 minutes, he's riding Daniel Radcliffe like a jet ski off of a
Hmm.
deserted island, and then shortly thereafter, in the first, like, 20 minutes, as he's trying to talk to Manny, to Daniel Radcliffe's character, and be like, "Well, this is how people are identifying. This is what you can talk about. This is what you can't talk about." Manny literally I sees what Hank's talking about. He's like, "But you don't love yourself, and you think you're trash." And, like,
Hmm.
literally, as soon as he teaches him about how people are feeling, he figures him out within 5
Seconds,
minutes of
yeah.
being yeah, like, so quick.
Like the whole comments about, so you ran away because you aren't loved, but you
Mhm.
want to go back because you want to be loved. And it's like
"But
he's
you
it's
think you're trash." Yeah.
right. And it kind of boils down to the one thing that kept popping into my head when I would hear him talk about that, is the idea of like, my parents have always kind of instilled in me, and I live by it to this day, is that it's really hard for other people to love you if you don't love yourself.
Mhm.
And you have Manny kind of saying that without saying it, and I feel like that's part of the theme and the journey that Dano is going on
One
throughout this
yeah,
whole movie.
totally agreed, 100%, and that's also part of the fun of the film itself, is, like, it's is he executing his own therapy, like, making this up, talking to this corpse that he found, or is this really happening? Or because then when you get that 3rd act coming in and, like, reality comes crashing in and everyone else is like, "What the hell is going on with this
Hmm.
guy?" And then you have a fantastical ending as well, and I remember reading that the Daniels were talking about this movie when it first came out. They were saying the idea of the film was the first fart was supposed to make you laugh and the last one is supposed to make you cry.
Yes, yes, I read that one too. Yeah, that's what I think on like, I think it's on IMDb. It's in the little trivia that was Paul
Mhm.
Dano had said in an interview. That's what sold him, was them telling him that about this script in this film.
And also, like, watching most of the behind the scenes thing, you can tell there's, like, so much community and family and, like, time and care, because the bulk of this movie happens just in the middle of the woods with them constructing all these random
Hmm.
things. I know Daniel Radcliffe and Paul Dano are both featured heavily on the soundtrack, either humming or singing,
Yeah.
or, like, and it was, Andy Hull, who had been famous for being the lead singer of Manchester Orchestra. This is
Hmm.
actually he co-orchestrated this score with another I think Robert McDowell, that may be top of my head, I could probably pull it up too. But Yeah, Robert McDowell. And it's just because there's like not a point in this movie where it's like everything has to work together. And like I said before, you can see how this leads into Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is why
Hmm.
when I heard when you get Everything Everywhere All at Once, and I remember hearing about that a couple years after this debuted and was like, hold on, their new movie is going to be produced by the Russos and it's supposed to be this sci-fi epic. And that's kind of how it was. So it's there's so many reasons. Like this movie just makes me so happy too. Like I wrote down a couple of lines, and like one of Manny's lines, he literally goes, "Hank, when I masturbate, I'm going to think about your mom."
Just like in going into that whole thing, he's like, when he was like, when Manny was just like, I want to have sex. I wish there was some way I could pretend to do it. And like Hank's describing what masturbation is. And then Manny's just like, I bet you masturbate a lot because masturbation
He's like,
makes people
"No,"
happy.
and then he says no because then he thinks about his mom, and then he breaks that down
Yeah.
really quickly as well. There's still one point, and I think almost on either every time but once I've watched this movie, his Manny's monologue. It's not even a monologue. His little line at the very end, where right before all of the reality comes crashing in, where he talks about how um I should look up the exact line because it's so good, where he's talking about how maybe if everyone just accepted that they were pieces of shit, that like everyone could be laughing and happy together, and like everyone would just be more accepting of everybody. And he's like, you have no idea how great that sounds.
Yeah.
And like that's like the core of the film to me, where it's just like it's such a simple concept to where it's like we're all kind of pieces of shit just floating around this
Hmm.
earth trying to do the best that we can. And that's what a lot of this is about. Like the middle section of this movie is just them playing with trash and constructing things in the woods.
Right. And to think of how close they are to civilization at certain points with it
Mhm.
feels like too, with how it's almost like they get a little bit stuck. So Dana's just like, oh, we're just gonna stay here and I'm gonna teach Manny how to do all of these things rather than go and deal with the real world and deal with everyone out there because he's still very much scared. Like he wants to get home, but I also feel like part of him just doesn't, which is because you're not going to construct all of these things to, I guess, work out your own therapy. Like you kind of said,
Mhm.
if you wanted to stay where you are.
Yeah, it's almost like he's doing that to like tread water, where he's not ready to improve and he's just kind of working it out and figuring out all of what he has to do. And so much of this is like I noticed this time watching, there's a lot of Paul Dano saying that's good talking or that's bad talking.
Mm-hmm.
Like when Manny first figuring some out, he goes, "You can't just say everything in your head, that's bad talking." And then it's so interesting after they go through everything, and Hank has lied to Manny about whose phone it was and who Sarah is.
Right.
And then right before we lose Manny for a little bit for most of the third act, where Manny literally is like so defeated, and after he's been crying, and then they meet the little daughter, and he
Mm-hmm.
goes, "Please don't tell Sarah how much I loved her." I was like, oh, that's so much like more hurting. And he's realizing how much, like as a character, he's realizing what can and can't be communicated, and he's understanding that kind of shame, and he's
Yeah.
understanding why people are behaving the way they are and holding back certain things. But he does that, and then going back to being a corpse, it's like, oh, it's so why how am I feeling such strong feelings for a corpse, that just a magical corpse that came to life? And then I like how they threw the line in that he's not the Swiss Army man, but he calls him a multi-purpose tool guy.
Yeah. That yeah, no, that was a really good one. I think I found the quote you were talking about, by the way.
Mm,
It's where Manny says, maybe everyone's a little bit ugly and maybe we're all just dying sacks of shit. Or we're
mhm.
all just ugly dying sacks of shit. And maybe all it'll take is one person to just be okay with that, and then the whole world will be dancing and singing and farting, and everyone will feel a little bit less alone.
And that's the thing.
That
If you
does
think
sound
about
so
that too,
nice.
right? Like, and I don't want to do because it's still new, but like see this and then see Everything Everywhere All at Once, because they have such similar themes, and
Yeah.
some of them they you can boil them all the way down. Like for that movie, for Everything Everywhere, I called it optimistic nihilism because I
Mm-hmm.
think it goes a couple steps further than this one. This is like the inception of that idea, where it's just like a little nugget that they're kind of expounding upon. But like once you get to the full madness, that's Everything Everywhere. Like it's hard to talk, especially for me, because I feel like they're so close in themes and they're so intertwined. Whereas, but that this one's more introspective, where you're dealing with
Yeah.
one character and the struggles that they have, and that one's more dealing with straight up love and familial
Mm-hmm.
love and how that is. going forward.
And familial trauma in a way too, you know, like
Exactly.
you don't dive too much into it. Because like, one thing I do like to bring up, especially with kind of just writing in general, and one kind of theme or that kind of comes around is like at first when Manny's trying to talk and Dano is trying to figure out what he's saying, and he immediately throws out the R word. And he's like, "You
Yeah.
sound R word
Yeah.
right now." And then he's like, "Oh, I sound like my father." And then Manny
Yeah.
starts saying it, and Dano's like, really can't say that word. And then
Say
every
that.
time after that, you can't say that. And then when he gets back to civilization and he's kind of hiding from his dad, but then his dad does find him and that whole big reveal happens and he says it again and Dana goes, "You can't say that word." And then he runs away
He
with
does it, but
Manny.
he
I'm
also
like, yes.
but he also does it with like a very calm confidence. Like he's not mad at his dad. He goes, "Dad, don't say that word." And
Yeah.
it's like that's when he's decided. He's like, "No." He's like, "This isn't who I want to be." So it's like there's definitely a lot more going on there. They're so good about internalizing. Like they have all this whole. He clearly has a whole other story, and that's the other thing I really appreciate about this movie. It's such a fantasy, but it still feels really, really grounded. Like there's still
Yeah.
some moments where it's like when Manny first starts to talk and Dano runs away screaming, and he's like, and when he first has his compass penis and he smacks it and runs away, like it's all the humor, like it tracks, like it's so much of it. You're just like, yes, that's how people
Yep.
would react in this situation,
Yeah.
even though this is a ridiculous fantasy.
And then all of a sudden, I think I texted a friend of mine when I told him and I was watching this movie, and he was like, "Oh, that movie's lovely. As long as you like it, as long as like you realize what you're in for, because it's a great movie. Because I love this film." But what he said, he goes, "Oh, love that movie. Not everyone's cup of tea." I was like, I
It's
can see
yes.
that for sure.
It's
But I immediately texted him as soon as the scene happened where when Dana goes, "Manny, I think your penis is guiding us home."
yeah, yeah. I wrote that one down too.
I laughed so hard when there's moments in watching this that like something just gets said or something happens and I literally laughed out loud. Like it was like a loud like ha, not like a long laugh, but like a loud like just
It's just
belly
so
ha.
unexpected. Yeah.
Yes,
You're just
yes.
like, it's like they did that, they filmed it, it worked, and it fits in this story.
And and for whatever reason, everything that they do in this movie just makes sense. Like, sure, a corpse washed up and his farts can save you, and said it literally is a 90-minute pull my finger joke, and I'm not mad at it
Yeah.
in any way, shape, or
You
form.
can load him up with rocks and use him like a machine gun. You can like swing his arm
He
back
gets like
and
the
it turns
Ricky and
into like
Here
this.
arm going.
Yeah, it turns into this axe and you can chop wood into like, and then they just build buses and like movie screens, and there's like a really sweet subplot in the middle where Hank turns into Sarah, and then there's
Yes.
a romance where you're kind of waiting for them to kiss, and then they kind of do underwater, and then all of a sudden they're propelled out of the water with the farts again. Like
Yeah.
that's the thing too. If you try to describe this outside of that as the simple plot where it's like a depressed man who's stranded on a desert island finds a corpse that slowly comes to life, and then he has to teach him about the world. If you then went further and you listed off everything else that happens in the movie, people would look at you like you were nuts. They would be like, "There's no way this is an actual film."
Right. Oh, for sure. And it's something that you mentioned, like, you know, this depressed man teaching this corpse who's slowly coming back to life about the world. It's kind of the way that he's teaching him about the world too. Like he's teaching him about the world
He's teaching
in
him
a
like a
positive
child.
light.
Yeah.
Right? Like he could just sit there and be like, the world's a piece of shit and everyone sucks and but he's like teaching him about everything that's beautiful, and that it's like it feels like he's starting to appreciate what's around him. But again, too scared to come into those feelings and talk about them with the people who need to hear it.
Well, he's teaching him about the world as comfortable as he is with it. And that's what you get into later in the movie when you realize he has been lying to him. And by lying to Manny, he's also admitting that he's been lying to himself as well. So and that's when you're getting that growth towards the end of the third act, where it's like Manny shuts down when the bear attacks, and then it's just like, and then he fully comes back to life. It's so ridiculous. I love it.
Just a real quick like chop at the leg from that bear on Paul Dano. Like again, this movie is just the things that are graphic, and you're just like, fuck. Like I wasn't expecting that. Like I was expecting to see a claw just, grab at Dano's leg, but also wasn't expecting Dano to punch the bear in the face.
I gotta smack him from behind, Manny. Like, yeah.
because he
Did you
tried to like
notice
wind him up.
this is also the second movie? I'm not sure. Did you catch? This isn't a spoiler for Everything Everywhere because I'm trying to avoid those. But did you catch that this is now the second movie in a row that they've taken a very popular, very obscure song and worked it into the entire movie?
Yeah. Oh, I did not notice
So
that.
so did you so in Everything Everywhere, they did it with a movie from or a song from the late 90s called Story of a Girl.
Yes.
Absolutely, Story of a
Yeah, yeah,
Girl.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And like you have oh, I'm gonna mispronounce the name. Ki Hai Kwan, I think is his
Yes.
name. He was saying, "And your clothes never wear as well the next day."
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's
Yes.
like
Yes. 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 Yeah.
you can't put those words in that order. Like, they knew it was an illusion. So I
Yeah.
need to listen to that soundtrack because I know they did that. But this one has Cotton Eye Joe
Yes.
at numerous points throughout the movie
Yeah. Yeah.
where it's a character's humming it, you're hearing it in the background, and you're like, why? This fits too. Like this
Daniel
should,
Radcliffe is just like singing it, but singing a slow version
yeah,
of it when he's
yeah,
on like the pretend bus with the fake earbuds in his ears out of like
yeah.
the eraser.
So it's one of those things where it's like it's such a trendy thing to do now with new movie trailers where they're taking an old cover song and then just like repurposing it or slowing it down or having somebody do a different cover. Here, this movie did it before
Yeah.
any of those trailers came out.
And did
So
it so well.
you can all thank Daniels. Yeah.
You can all think. I love Daniels, and they haven't done a whole lot, like right. Like they've done Swiss Army Man. They did Everything Everywhere all at once.
One of them directed a movie called The Death of Dick Long, which I did watch. I would say it's arguably weirder than this movie.
Okay.
Um, it is even more niche if that's possible.
Sure.
But I think that's most of it because I don't know. I'm sure they're gonna have their pick after Everything Everywhere being the first A24 to gross 100 million,
Oh,
and it has
absolutely.
awards written all over it. Like they'll be able to do whatever they want now.
I loved Everything Everywhere. I need to watch it again. I've only watched it in the theaters the one time, and we own it. I just haven't had
Mhm.
time to like because I have to sit down and watch all the way through. Like
Yeah.
I have to. Like I had to do it with luckily everything that I've had so far for the most part has been 90 minutes to 2 hours. There's been a
Oh,
couple
good.
episodes like Zodiac was 2.5 because
Mhm.
apparently David Fincher can't do shit shorter than 2 hours. I've learned.
Not really. No.
So, but even those, like, I would start watching them but I'd be starting them too late. So I'd have to come back the next day and I can't like pick up where I left off. I
There
can't do it.
there was a part of me that almost recommended a newer one. If you haven't found time to carve out for RRR, I would
I
highly
need to.
recommend
That's
that.
another one.
But that's 3 hours
Yes.
long, but it is an
That's
epic
what
film,
everyone
and it
keeps
is
saying. I
insane.
know everyone was talking about it.
Yeah.
I don't mind a long film. I
Mhm.
have to plan my day around it because I have to sit down and I have to watch the whole thing. Like I did it with back when like the pandemic first happened and everything was shut down and it was quarantined. Like I literally did it. I did a
Mhm.
whole Tarantino to start to finally watch like
Oh, sure.
Inglorious Bastards and the entire and both Kill Bills, back to back. So I can get like these 3 hour movies done. Like I think I watched Braveheart during that time because again,
Okay.
been wanting to watch it, never did because I'm like, this movie's too long for me to sit down and watch the whole way through. And I just need to like finally suck it up. And I did. And I loved it. Same with, and people were losing their minds. And I probably should have done this podcast back then, but I didn't have all the friends that I do now.
Well,
So I hadn't
yeah.
made my friends
And
on the
that's
internet yet. So.
bonus out of just jumping into that film Twitter and wherever our
Yeah.
little niche is. Because I was thinking about that as well. And if you were, because it's a concept that everyone could do. There's literally but it's making it personal to you and then having somebody on who really
Right.
loves and appreciate these movies. Because I was thinking about that because you have all of whatever film canon you could do this for years. And thinking about this in comparison to, there was another movie I watched where it was not even a similar plot, but it's two guys. I don't even know if you've heard of this. There's a movie called Jerry.
No.
And it was by Gus. It was by Gus
Okay.
Van Sant, and it was literally the whole movie is Matt Damon and Casey Affleck talking and walking through the desert. That's the entire movie. And on paper, similar to Swiss Army Man, but the execution is just night and day. So those are literally, it's those two guys talking. They just have conversations throughout the whole movie. And so watching that versus watching this, they're two wildly, vastly different experiences. But it's also one of those things where the more you watch and the more you're exposed to, you're going to find those weird pockets. Whereas as opposed to the backgrounds that you have for The Rock and
Right.
Big Trouble, those are movies that everyone's going to talk about and everyone's going to know, but you're going to get those weird, more obscure ones. And like you said, with A24, there's going to be some weird things coming up for it.
That come up. I mean, I remember going and seeing one of the first movies we saw back in theaters. Kind of an epitome of an A24 movie, but my husband was so excited to finally be able to go see The Green Knight because it was supposed to
Green
come
Knight,
out
yeah, I saw that too.
pre-pandemic. Then theaters shut down, and then so it finally came out.
Mhm.
We went to go see it, and we're watching it, and that was again like one of my first I've had a few A24 films, but not a whole lot. But I think that was my first off the wall for me weird
I'm tr
A24 films, and it was really not even
I
that
might
weird.
have Yeah. No, it's a pretty I would call it almost like an Arthurian
Yeah.
fairy tale. It's like as far as if you categorize it like that, it's pretty straightforward. I think I was expecting it to be like you said, A24. I was expecting it probably to be a little bit more
Hmm.
sensationalized. But like they do a good job with the fairy tale aspect. It's
It
gorgeous.
is. It's
That
a
film is like
beautiful film. And
breathtaking.
I learned all about it too, like before going to see it, because that whole point of that movie is what it was based off is it's based off of a Welsh poem that was translated by J.R.R. Tolkien. Um
Mm,
yeah, that was I don't know if it was Welsh, I can't remember what it was, but it was in a one of those old English languages, and
okay.
And Tolkien translated it originally. It was this big poem, and from what my husband told me, it followed it pretty well. But then again, I've also the other A24 films that I've seen that absolutely just loved, and it again talking about these young adult actors, you get Robert Pattinson, who's now doing all these great A24
Mhm.
films with Rover and Good Time. Oh my
Good
God,
time.
good
Mhm.
every
The
oh yeah,
Lighthouse, yeah.
haven't seen The Lighthouse yet. That one is on the list though.
I I was gonna say I haven't either, but there's a headspace in for me where it's like I confuse Robert Eggers and oh, who's the other gentleman? The guy who directed Midsummer. I confuse those two
Gotcha.
in my head. So I've seen like some of them. Like I haven't seen Hereditary, but I saw Midsummer. I haven't seen The Lighthouse, but I saw The Witch. And it's like I know where my tastes lie, and I'm like, oh, maybe I'll get
Yeah,
to it eventually.
I did The Northman when that came out because I've been trying to be like really diligent this year with like new releases. So I did do
Hmm.
The Northman. Great. And that's what I think I love so much about A24 films. And I love that it started as like this little niche kind of like indie thing, but now they're
Hmm.
really gaining some ground. Like I said, we everything everywhere. Marcel the Shell. Oh my God. I could
Hmm.
go for
I need to go see that one. I
days
know I
on
haven't seen it
Marcel
yet.
the Shell. And again, completely different spectrum from what this movie is to that one.
Yeah.
And I think it's wonderful just how they cover all X, right? Like a horror movie
Hmm.
about people in the porno industry in the 70s, which is now getting the prequel is going to be coming out soon. Like it's so good, and I love it so much because even like the movies that you don't think are gonna be that they just still find a way to make it weird but fun. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like,
Like,
yeah.
accessible. Like, they do a really good job of facilitating artists and letting them still
Hmm.
create their work, but also not making it 'cause like, I was a film studies major in college, so I've seen some of those art house movies where it's just like, you watch it and you're kinda like, "I see what you were going for, and I understand what you're trying to do, but this just isn't
Hmm.
for me." And I feel like they do a really good job of kind of facilitating, and this is a good example of taking like Swiss Army Man. This is a good example of taking probably something that could be more targeted for a niche audience, but allowing that kind of room and creativity for them to grow and say what they want to say, and then still making it like I think more people will find this movie now that Everything Everywhere is out and it's so
Hmm.
popular. It is I will say watching it years later, it's hitting me at a different point in my life than it did then. I think honestly because it's one of those things like I worked on my mental health in the pandemic and I really changed and I was in a different headspace watching this than I had like a couple years ago with one of the last times I saw it because it's one of those things where going back to this movie, it's I like them as filmmakers because they are always from the two movies I've seen, they're trying to take a world full of noise and just boil it all down to like very simple concepts and really relatable concepts in fantastical
Hmm.
ways in both this and in Everything Everywhere because they're in this one it's like it's one singular person who's been struggling just with being themselves and having any confidence, which is a very relatable thing for pretty much everyone on the planet, and then having kind of like, well, what do you how do you explain society to someone who doesn't know anything about it, and like where do they find their place and where do you go with that? And then even going on to those themes in Everything Everywhere, it's even more so where it's like you have a character who they literally call you are the worst version of
Mm-hmm.
yourself. And it's kind of just this similar starting point, but it's like takes a different path and then it shows you a lot of those different paths. So it's I love what they're able to do with a very like they tell simple stories very
Yes.
complicated.
Oh, absolutely.
So
I think that's kind of like the best way to really to put it into words in that sense. And kind of backtracking a little bit because I didn't get to
sure.
like ask you this at the beginning, but you mentioned being a film studies major. So, what is like your connection just with film in general, and why movies? And I mean, we've already kind of covered the whole why Swiss Army Man, but like,
Sure.
what like just kind of have 30 minutes in? Tell me about you.
It was one of those things. So I I always like personally, and this is something I'm dealing with now, and like I said, going to therapy and getting a lot of like rediscovering like where I am, what my passions are in the pandemic. And I've been lucky enough. I'm not like my parents raised me to be very pragmatic. This is also why I talk. My brain's got all over the place sometimes. So they raised me to be very pragmatic, but I have been lucky enough in high school. They're always like, "What do you want to do with your life?" I'm like, "I'm in fucking high school. Don't ask me now. Like I'm 16 years old. I don't want to decide what I'm doing for literally the
Yeah.
next 60 years of my life right now." So getting into college, I'm like, "Oh, I could do this. I could do that." I almost majored in psychology, but then I'm like, "Oh, I'm really enjoying being in theater, and I really wanted to do work with film." And so, like halfway through the time in college, they announced that like film studies was a major. So I double majored in theater and film studies, and the focus was writing, acting, and directing. And I've been lucky enough that I have the biggest part of my resume is acting, just because I had an agency. I've done a bunch of commercial stuff. I've been lucky enough to do some of the movies you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, and I've done a couple small TV things. They're all mostly indies, but it's still I was an extra in Captain America 2, which was really fun and interesting, but it's also one of those things. It's a fun story, but I can't really use it as like a
Right.
basis of work because it's extra work. So it was one of those things where it's like I've also been lucky enough that I can pick up things quickly and I can, especially for a camera, if you need me to do something, then I can do it. And actually that's the Captain America thing plays into that. And then there was another time where I did a commercial and nobody. So a lot of times as an actor, I'll pull the curtain back a little bit, but I know it's not what we're really talking about. Um, you don't know what you're doing. Like you may get the script. Most times you'll get a script, but there was one time I got a commercial and it was through a casting agent. She didn't go through my agency. She just messaged me directly. She said, "Hey, can you come out for a couple hours and shoot this thing?" I'm like, "Sure." I knew a couple of people on there. I met a really good friend of mine there, another actor, and so, but I didn't realize I was the quote unquote hero character. I'm the one they're following, and it's only a 15-second commercial. So it's for DSW. It's for
Hmm.
shoes, and I don't know the concept at all. They literally had one director, one cameraman, and then a few actors, and that was the entire. Like normally, there's like PAs, there's a bigger crew. This is literally the tiniest commercial shoot you can imagine. And so they stick me in the outfield, and we're playing softball, and that's all I know. And so I have a glove and like wearing baseball stuff, and they're like, I'm in the outfield. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to get any of this because the coverage is not on me. Coverage being like they're shooting from behind home plate, so I'm way off in the background. And they're like, all right, we're going to come do your stuff now. And they come up to me, literally, they're about to film me, and they're like, "Do you know what we're doing?" And I'm like, "No, nobody told me anything." They're like, "Oh, okay. Well, this is the concept, and this is literally a 15-second commercial. So, basically, there's a hit fly ball. I'm the hero person. I'm the outfielder, so I act like I'm under it, act like I'm about to catch it. But right before I catch it, I run off frame and I run into a DSW, pick out new bright blue shoes, and run back, and I catch the ball.
Perfect. Makes
And so
sense.
that's yeah. All I had to do was catch the ball. But like what I didn't know, and they already filmed the stuff in the DSW. So what happened was they're like, okay, so you catch it and you act happy, and we basically need you to like vault over this fence just to do like a little stunt. I didn't know I was doing a stunt that day, but I looked at the fence and I was like, they're like, just put your hands over it and like kind of hop over. And I'm like, do you want me to vault it? And they were like, you can do that. And I'm like, I think so. So they literally they weigh up the frame rate so it was like a very smooth motion, and the director or the cameraman was on one side, and they got this really smooth motion of the camera following me and me jumping it like it was a hurdle, and then it all cut together in about 15 seconds, and then I catch the ball and
That's
smile, and that was
awesome.
it. And that was like all of that happened in like a 3 or 4 hour time frame. So I've just been lucky, and as far as doing it in film, like I love the full creative collaborative process, and I think that's another reason why I identify with the Daniels as filmmakers so much. Not just because my name is Dan, but I mean, hey, synergy.
Nothing if
But
not on brand.
it, exactly. It just seems like from everything that I'm able to watch that they've put out, they pour their heart and soul into what they're doing. You can tell there's from every frame you're watching, like everything is purposeful. They know what they're doing, but you can also tell that like even when they talk about it in interviews, it's so much more like a family, and they're just having the time of their lives creating something that they truly believe in. And they've put out two films that are we could sit here and we could probably talk for another hour just
Yeah.
about this one, not to mention the new one. And it's like I want to be part of that process. I want to be adding and subtracting and throwing out ideas that are shit, but ones that are awesome that could stick and go all the way through. Like I've been lucky enough to like improv stuff that's made it into commercials and movies. I literally rewrote an entire monologue for myself in more than one project. um sometimes, well, if they don't catch me, I'm just
Why
gonna go
not?
ahead and do it because it's well the and that's part of how
Yeah.
my process works as an actor. If I can make it fit better in my mouth, then it's gonna come out more convincing. So I like telling. I like entertaining as well, storytelling and entertaining, because I've been lucky enough that I've already had more opportunities than I would have thought possible. But like I'm not going to stop, and I want to keep doing it because it's fun, and it's a different type of like I did. And you said writing. I don't have as many writing credits because they're all smaller and not much has been produced. But like a couple of months ago, I just saw something online and they were like, do this trash draft class. And it was basically you just try to write a pilot in like a week. And so I only had a half baked idea when I went in there. And then 8 days later, I had written 40 pages on a pilot that I had a decent
That's so
idea for.
cool.
So it was, yeah, just much more creatively energizing for me. So it's like in a vacuum, my brain is very problem solving oriented. Like I like taking problems and working on them, but I also like doing that in a film aspect, which is a very strange like juxtaposition and dichotomy in my brain to exist.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
Like I
No,
said, I'm
I
all over the
love it.
place.
No, I think that's amazing. I one thing that has always been so fun to learn. I love learning about people. I'm a huge and it kind of goes back into like with what I do for a living, being a behavior analyst and everything. And I have to lead people and talk with people. I have to deal with all kinds of people on a regular, just like the rest of us do.
Mhm.
But I love every time I have a problem that I can't figure out, I go back and I find the section that it's in and how to win friends and influence people. A little bit dated at this point,
Mhm.
but there's a reason why this book has been around for almost 100 years, right? Like it's
Mhm.
amazing. And one of the things that it points out and it says is some of the most successful business tycoons is people who ask somebody three things about themselves before they say something about themselves and then remember the answer to those three things. So like just as simple as like and
Ah.
also another one I love is saying learning someone's name and actually using it is another tool that I love. But
Mhm.
the idea of like learning these things about people and then remembering it later is so important because people love talking about the things that they love, right? And so when you
Yeah.
give people a
Yeah.
platform to talk about things that they love and you're sincerely interested, because I am sincerely interested, and because I am on this journey now of widening my film knowledge and what I like to watch
Mhm.
and getting beyond being a casual movie watcher. Like I'm never gonna am I gonna, at this day and age get into writing or act? No, because I'm not good at it. So, but I want to be able to appreciate what other people see and what other people appreciate too. And sometimes we agree, like almost everything that I've watched with people, I've agreed on. And then sometimes we don't, like The Burbs. Wasn't a big fan of it. So, like, it happens. And I think that's great. And I love being able to have these conversations and finding out what it is about the movies that speak to these people and why they want to talk about them. And kind of getting into that is if you had to list we've talked a lot about different parts of this movie, but if you had to
Mhm.
say your top three moments in any order whatsoever for this movie, what do you think they would be?
I think we already talked about one of them. It would definitely be the little blurb that Daniel
Hmm.
Radcliffe has about all of us being pieces of shit and just
Yeah.
being okay with it, and then everyone would be singing and laughing and dancing. That's definitely one of the top ones. I think a new one for me too is the please don't tell Sarah how much I loved her, because it's heartbreaking to hear
Yeah.
him say that when he understands, like that's when he gets that moment of comprehension where it's like, no, I understand what it means to be a member in this society, and I don't want to burden. And that's the other thing too, is like, even if, though it's such a small line, it's him saying, I don't want to burden somebody else with something that's my
Yeah.
problem. And that stems from a lack of communication, because it's like there's now two people who haven't told Sarah how they felt. And it changes that one line changes the entire dynamic of everything. I also think we talked about it a little bit earlier, and this isn't in one particular moment, but like everyone, like this concept you had to commit
Hmm.
to. Like if they weren't fully on board with this, or they didn't really go for it, it would not have worked. So like when you have, X number of people in the woods just having fun, they really did it. I'm trying to think last singular moment. I might just cheat and say the
Yeah.
montages, because the montages are some of the best. Like they're so visually interesting, and then some of the even the songs in there
Hmm.
too. Like when they did the popcorn
Yes.
montage, all of the lyrics in that song are just saying what's happening on the screen, and it's so much fun and it's so joyful. And I think that's part of it. We dialed back a little bit of the reviews too, because one of the downsides, and I just want to address it, not to
No,
like
yeah.
harp on negative, but like something that I had to do for my own mental health was we stopped doing a bit of reviews, because I didn't like the amount of negativity that was surrounded, especially in some of the parts that we listen to and some of the spaces that we exist online. There's a lot of like bashing of
Yes.
films, and like I'm fine, and I don't even engage in a lot of those conversations, because it's like I'm fine if you don't like it. I'm fine if it's not for you. I don't like aggressively being overly negative to the point where it's like you're bashing somebody else's art or entertainment. Like we all know, like a movie like The First Suicide Squad, it's not a good
Right.
movie. But like if you're going to lay into it, if you're going to lay into any movie and like just beat it to death, then I personally I think there's something else going on, that you're displacing
Hmm.
that anger onto something. And it's like I don't like that kind of discourse. And I think that kind of discourse it shouldn't be. You should be lifting other people up, especially in an artistic
Right. And I
space.
think and
So
kind of touching on that, it's like even if like I said, like going back to when I talked about the Burbs, I was with Moose Hassan and Brother Lomas, and they love that movie. Like they were so excited to talk about it, and I enjoyed it, but it
mhm,
wasn't my cup of tea, and that's okay too,
mhm,
right? Because everything
yeah.
is going to be subjective in film. Like some things are not going to be your cup of tea, but you know what? I know I can't do make a fucking movie, so I'm not going to sit there and act like I know what was going on with the editors or with this behind the scenes or like the toxicity in the fandom and behind films and people like no it's a bad movie. Why is it a bad movie? Because you say it's a bad movie, or is it a bad movie
Mhm,
because of this aspect of it? Or like if you look at people, you look at a director like David O. Russell, people love flocking to want to work with him because he makes some great movies, but the guy, if you read about him, is a real piece of shit, right?
yeah.
So, and the fact that he's still able to do work is because he puts out pretty decent stuff, and then he puts out Joy, which wasn't as great,
Mhm,
but he's still getting work, and people still talk about him, and they do all these things, and it's like that. I would say like no, I don't want to support David O. Russell, but if these actors are going to be in this, and I like the Christian Bales, and I like the Margot Robbies, and the like it becomes like a very hard pill to swallow. And then when we become that as people talking about the movies and adding into that toxicity,
mhm,
it makes it not fun.
mhm. It's a really strange industry, especially being so front
Hmm.
facing. Like you hear a lot of that about. You'll hear directors, producers, actors, sometimes to a lesser extent writers. And so many of that front facing part of the industry is like they're literally the face of whatever project you have. And so I've even like personally I've had to deal with it on a much smaller scale, but like I've had to like had some of those hard conversations either with like unsavory people, or like what kind of degree do I want to be associated with X. I turned down a project once where um it was basically I had an audition. They told me I got the part, but basically, and I won't go. I'm not going to bash the actual project, but like when I went into the audition, it would be like you're this character, you're blah blah blah, you're playing blah blah blah, And like they would tell you like occasionally when you get the sides like, oh, you would be this is like maybe nudity. I don't think this one said nudity, but like
Mm-hmm.
strong sexual situations, which I'm sure I'd seen that before. I've done some indie horror, so I've been a part of that before. So I go in for the audition, I read for it, and we have a little conversation after in the casting room, and they were like, oh, if you take this part, we're going to need to do a film of you taking advantage of a young girl. And I was like, oh, that's different than strong
Right.
sexual situations in my estimation. They're like, but you're playing two characters. You'd be playing the father, and then you'd be playing his son, and the son's a really redeeming character. And I thought about it for like a week, and I called him back, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable doing this, because it was like, could have been a nice direct. I'd never heard of the guy before, but it was like, no, it's like I'm gonna
Yeah.
pass. Like I have seen people much more talented and much more famous than me fumble something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also one of those things where it's like, who knows, that does become like, and then you get known as the guy who did
Right.
that. And it was one of those things where it was like, I heard that and I'm like, it did not sit well with me. And that's kind of trusting your instincts as well. And there's so many balls to be juggling in the air. And I think I'll even bring it back to what we watched. You have to have that when you do something like this or something like they asked me to do, you have to have that kind of ultimate trust in creativity and in the people who are creatively executing your project, because this could have ran awry. Like Dano and Radcliffe, they could have looked absolutely
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous in this movie, but the care that was taken with everything from like the lighting to the cinematography to the music to the acting to the right to the like there's not one thing in this movie that didn't serve another purpose, plot point. Like it all connected
Yeah.
very well. And I think that's why, like, for a long time, this was my favorite movie of all time. And it might have been usurped by the new
Mm-hmm.
Daniels film, just because it's like they know how to strike those chords well and they resonate so strong.
Oh, absolutely. And that makes total sense too. And I kind of with what you're saying too on the flip side of it is you get like the Daniel Radcliffes and the Robert Pattinsons who have done these young adult, these big literary characters, and will people ever take them seriously as an actor now that this is all done? Like Daniel Radcliffe, like I mean, if you look back at what has Rupert Grint done since the Harry Potter series,
Hmm.
right? Like that's what he's known for, and he really hasn't done a whole lot since then, or nothing that you've heard of. Emma Watson, at least, had like Perks of Being a Wallflower, Beauty and the Beast. Like she's had some other fame. So and then you get Daniel Radcliffe, where again, this could have been completely a hit or miss with him at that point too, because it's one of his first big
Hmm.
things outside of Harry Potter that's getting recognition. Complete departure from what the rest of. I mean, how many people do you think actually when they went to this movie went to it because it was Daniel Radcliffe and they wanted to see what he was doing, and then were very surprised
Right.
with what they got?
I'm sure that was part of the marketing too, where it was like, but I mean, they had, if this is, I will say, if this was a bigger
Hmm.
studio taking a chance on an indie, I feel like that probably would have been front and
Sure.
center. It would have been cut differently for trailers. The marketing would have been entirely different. I still think having it at a place like an
Hmm.
A24 or an Annapurna or anyone or a Neon, some of these
Yeah.
smaller places, you still have more creative control and you're still getting more of a taste of what it was. This is one of those things where it's like I don't even know if I might have seen one trailer and I'm like, this looks so weird.
I'm
I'm
so
so into it.
into
I
it.
want to
It's
see
so
what's
weird.
going on.
Um, yeah, because like going through like doing the research and everything with getting ready to record and talk about this is I was doing like a visit on Rotten Tomatoes and seeing what critics had been saying,
Mhm.
and its overall consensus of it is it's a weird out there concept, but Dano and
Mhm.
Radcliffe are fucking incredible, and I really think that's what it is. It's like it I don't think anyone else could have done what they did with the, because especially when you have a movie that's heavy set on dialogue, it has to be sold by the
Mhm.
people that you're watching it with, and Daniels clearly are very dialogue driven people when it comes to their
Yes.
writing and what they're doing. So every word has a meaning, every moment has a meaning, every look. It's so dialed in and it's right there. And without the two of them, I don't think this film would be anywhere near as
Oh God,
wonderful
no.
and as literally heartwarming as it is. Like you don't even think
You
it's like even watching Daniel Radcliffe float away in his farts at the end, like back into the ocean,
yeah.
like off to save somebody else who, because
Yeah.
because that's the other thing you get. You have no idea. At the end of it, I was like, where the fuck did he come from? Like where, like right,
Mhm.
like. You don't even
Wait,
realize.
hold on. Where did he come from? Where did he go?
Yes. Yeah,
Maybe.
exactly.
It wouldn't surprise me if they were sitting around one day and it's like, how do we write a movie about that? Where it's like literally one of our main characters is like, where did he come from? And
And where
did
did
he
he?
go?
Oh, God damn it, Dan. It's exactly that is. I feel like that's like. I feel like that is the perfect moment for me to like go into my letterbox and do our final little bit where I rank it.
Sure.
Final thought, all that fun stuff. Because I feel like I can't top what you just did, and I want to be mad at it.
Occasionally,
I want to be so mad.
I can land one of those.
You want to host a show because Jesse and Sean are gonna fire me after that. I'm just.
I've hosted shows before.
You can take it. You win. Y'all done.
I would just show up and be like, guys, just leave. They probably would too, knowing those.
They'd be like, Allison,
like,
bye.
All right.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate you. No, but I think for this film and in watching it and seeing it in like this hopefully towards end pandemic world that we're living in,
right.
I feel like this to me sits right at I think I'm going with a 4 out of 5 on this one. I mean, maybe after more viewings it might hit a little bit higher, but I still think I'm glad with 4 out of 5.
No, and I wouldn't argue with it. Like I said a little bit ago, it was for a long time. I think Everything Everywhere is probably going to usurp this as one of my favorite movies ever. And I think this one, it's just it's so weird. And I think when it came out, it was exactly the move. Let me start that sentence over again.
I'm leaving it all in, by the way, because you already made me. You already made me look bad with that last.
I am the same way where it's like if I don't have to edit, I don't
hate
edit.
Editing
Like it's easier. It's not so much that I hate it; it's more that it's just so time consuming.
I have to listen to myself. I just even more.
Don't want to be doing it. I mean, I have to do that for my job, but this movie definitely hit me when it needed to hit me, and it was like a point of time, and it was exactly what it was. And I think if seeing it when it came out, being a different person when it did come out, and that's the thing. Now I don't feel that people also get so beholden to their opinions. I think this touches a little bit on that toxicity that we were talking about earlier. Like if someone doesn't have the same opinion as you, that's okay. And I've browbeat some of my friends. I did browbeat Eric to watch RRR, and then he did it to some of our other friends. And now it's like, but it's one of those things like, it's different being like, I'm going to force positivity upon you versus like an anger thing. And so I think that's where, especially something like Everything Everywhere, where it's like that movie is ultimately unrelentingly positive. Like that movie is just like, it is a beacon. I might watch it later tonight as well, and I'm probably going to cry again. It's okay. It's a big day of crying when you're watching Daniel's movies.
Literally everything. Yeah, everything.
That's a newer thing. Since we started doing our podcast too, it was definitely like, and I'm very much for the taking down of the 40s through 90s definition of masculinity, where it's like you bottle up I'm going to fucking
all cry,
of them because it's like these are making me feel things, and that's I'm sharing that with people. I think I would see movies with Matt Nost occasionally. I think I've cried next to him in theaters just because it's like sometimes these movies are affecting me so much. I don't care. Like that's just who I am, and I want other people to know that that's an okay thing to do. So like, and that's just how I feel. So I think it was number one for me for a long time, but it was a movie of its time. It'll still probably be up there for top 5, top 10 for sure. But it was like that. And then my other ones, like top of my head, are like Blade Runner 2049 is a huge one for me as well. And then Blind Spotting. I think eventually you should definitely check.
I've done Blind Spotting.
Oh my God.
Good. Speaking of Blade Runner, and it comes back into my head. And what was it? Oh, the moment when you talk about Daniel, and I kept meaning to bring this up, and then you brought up Blade Runner 2049, so I can bring up Blade Runner Final Cut. In comparison to the moment where Daniel Radcliffe made the comment about please don't tell Sarah how much I loved her, and in the moments where he's realizing Paul Dano lied to him, it made me instantly think about that scene in Blade Runner where Harrison Ford lets the one chick who's a replicant know she's actually a replicant, and then tries to take it back in. Like Dano tries to pull him back too, after he just drops this bomb on him, and I don't know, like it just hit me in both of those times. I was like, God, that would have to suck. Like just coming back and like learning about life and thinking you know all of these things and all of these memories are your memories and you've had a great mom or you're in love with this person. And then someone goes, nope, just kidding. That's not it at all.
I did have an argument about 2049 where a buddy of mine saw it and he was like, I thought Ryan Gosling was really wooden. I'm like, I don't think we watched the same movie because he is breathtaking inside of
I
that.
mean,
Like
Ryan
in
Gosling
a
is
similar
breathtaking in
thing.
general, you know.
Well, exactly. But no, when he has that scene where it's another one. That's another epic, but I don't want to spoil that. Where have
I
you
have
seen that
not.
one?
I did Blade
Okay.
Runner because I wanted I want to watch 2049.
I so it's weird. I actually didn't grow like I just missed that. I saw Star Wars a lot growing up just because that's what you did when you were about my age. But it was one of those things that like since my dad was never super into that, I just Blade Runner was one of those like you're doing this whole podcast about movies you haven't seen. Blade Runner was one of those for mine. So I saw the final cut like maybe a month or so before 2049 came out. And then I saw 2049 in IMAX and I'm like, this is such a depressing world. I
Yeah.
want to live in it. Um
My
but
people.
there's a scene I want. Yeah, there's a scene in there where Ryan Gosling has a similar scene. I won't say anything beyond that, but it's like it's the watching his brain like struggle to process. It's very much lockstep with all the other things that
I
we just
can't
talked
wait.
about.
That's gonna be a real fun one.
Well, and it's also, but you brought up Prisoners earlier. 2049 is
Yeah.
Villeneuve.
Yeah. Good
Hmm.
old Denis. I got on a Denis kick because I was getting ready to go see Dune. So I wanted to have like a good I
Hmm.
did a real depressing movie watch day that I didn't mean it to be real depressing, but I watched
His
no,
early
no, it
stuff.
was what did I watch? I watched I watched Parasite. And then like my
Oh
husband had been
God.
trying to get me
Okay.
to watch Arrival for the longest time, so I did Parasite, and then I did
Oh.
Arrival, and then I
Oh
cried
geez.
for 3 hours because I was
Yeah. Oh yeah. Arrival is heavy stuff too. I haven't seen the early ones. I didn't see Prisoners or Enemy. I haven't seen those two, but I've seen
Prisoners
the
is
rest of
good.
them,
You want to talk about a
including like
good Dano
Sicario.
performance?
Oh, I'm sure. He's well, and that's the other thing before we wrap up. I think he is quietly one of the best like young working actors, but like 'cause have you seen Little Miss Sunshine? Because that's where he
Yes,
really got his
yes,
start. Because I remember seeing in him, this will date me. I remember seeing him in The Girl
yeah,
Next Door. And so
yeah,
that was the first thing
with
I
the
saw
Emil
him in.
Hirsch and
So he's
yeah. Oh God, I
hmm
love The Girl Next
oh I
Door. It's a great like the
right.
Timothy
So
Oliphant, real.
Timothy, I don't know how long stay in school with a two-finger
I
point. He's such a
God,
good
he
sleazy
is
dirtbag
also
in that
side
movie.
note. I dated a guy who looked just like Timothy Oliphant, so now he's
It's
forever ruined
amazing.
for me. Anyway, continue.
That's so, but yeah, so Dano did those, and then you do Little Miss Sunshine, where he does this little indie, and he says a lot without
Mhm.
talking in most of that movie. And then There Will Be Blood, and then like you're saying, Prisoners, and then you have this as well. And I'm happy he finally. I feel like it was weirdly late announced when he was the
Yeah.
Riddler. I feel like the whole movie was already done, and they're like, oh, by the way, Paul Dano's the Riddler, and then we're like, yeah, that's
Okay,
fantastic.
I'm in. I was already in on. I
Yeah,
was already in
like
on the Pattinson Batman.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
I yelled at so many people like, Twilight. I'm like, good time. Go watch it.
it's it's just a matter of like who movies are made for and how they're being made. I'm sure like Twilight movies had directors, but they're also, made by
Right.
committee somewhat. So
Also, they were Twilight. Those were fun. Um,
I've seen them all. I know what you're saying.
well, Dan, before we get out of here, go ahead, tell people where they can find you. All 22 of our possible listeners, let them know. Where
Right.
can they find you? What do you got
Hey,
going on?
anyone people can still listen to I don't know. We did ramble on for years and it was just like we're gonna keep screaming into the void, I don't even know how many episodes we recorded without a
I
real
love
mic,
that.
without me like having the software done well. Like now I just have this big podcast like portable studio in my closet that now we do everything over Zoom, so it's really easy. But we'll do ramble-ons every now and again. I am still co-hosting a community podcast called Apartment
I love
303.
Community so
If
much.
you ever want to talk to me, oh, me too. It is my
It's
favorite
so
TV show,
good.
bar none. Like I love it. I love everything about it. And it just the more I dive into it, the more I was lucky enough. You can hopefully find on our feed soon. It does exist on another feed, but I got to interview Jay Chandrasekhar, who Yeah, he directed, I think, maybe the third or fourth most Community episodes out of anyone, because I know the Russos did a bunch too.
Right.
But he directed almost 1 or 2 per season. I think he had 7 or 9. He did a lot, but we got to talk to him for like an hour. He was so cool, just
That's awesome.
telling us stories about Chevy and Burt Reynolds, and he was a delight to talk to. So much fun. So you can find that. It may be up on the Apartment 303. If not, I think it may be up on another one called 6 Seasons in a Podcast. Because I just jumped onto that. I did not have anything to do with setting it up. I was just very lucky, right place, right time, and they
Nice.
needed another voice. So you can find that. Apartment 303, Ramble On About Movies. I'm on various social medias at Oh Hi Dan Nye.
Awesome. And for everyone else as well, if you're enjoying what you're hearing, please make sure you've subscribed, rate, and review Flick and Reel on whatever audio platform you're listening to us on. And if you're listening on YouTube, please make sure to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts on Swiss Army Man. And be sure to check out and comment your thoughts on any of the other previous films we've discussed. Also, don't forget to hit that little bell icon to get notifications for any time we have new content drop on the channel. You can follow the show on Twitter at NeverSeenItFNR, and you can follow me at Allison Salamone. And until next time, my friends, be safe and let's go watch some movies.
Yay.
See ya.